Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Dev Diary. Due to me having a short break, missing a couple of Dev Diaries, this week we're going to be talking about some small changes that are coming in the next update for HOI4, as well as some of the things we missed while I wasn't here. Luckily, everything is not too long, so this is basically a normal sized Dev Diary comprised of 3 smaller Dev Diaries, so it should all be okay. As the cogs of time have moved forward, we're going to be first dealing with the summer open beta, then moving on to a small discussion about some of the 3D artwork that was made, before ending on the smaller changes that are coming towards things like industry and tank presets. So without further ado, let's jump in. The summer open beta dev diary from July 6th talked about the patches that were going to be coming over the summer open beta period. These are constantly in flux and changing, but we can quickly go over what they look like inside the summary open beta changes over here. One of the largest changes that came with this patch is to do with air and its specific change with how thrust is calculated for increasing agility instead of max speed. So now when you build a plane and you've got additional thrust that's not being used because you, for example, haven't stuck on as many guns as you could have, then this is going to add on to your agility, meaning it's more agile when it's fighting other planes, instead of it just being faster. This is matched with how airframes now have base max speeds to represent airframe size speed effects, meaning that there's a general push to change the dynamics of how planes would work, that a lighter plane is not necessarily a faster plane when it comes to things like incline, which they explain in a paragraph below. In addition, there have also been changes to how turrets work and new modules added, but considering that the nature of how the meta of air always changes, I guess we'll find out how good all of these are as the patches develop. The big change that came with land is the reduction in terrain combat widths slightly. They say slightly, but any change to combat width is going to be significant for changing how big your division sizes are going to be, which we should take a look at later. On the tank side of things, generally speaking, armor is going to be more powerful now, with tank chassis granting even more armor and making it more difficult for your light attack troops, specifically like infantry for example, to really pierce down those tanks. On the Navy side, it's a similar story when it comes to armour, with additional changes being made towards piercing thresholds, which also came into play with the rework of how tanks are being made, so in general, it's rebalanced armours. So I won't tarry too long on the remainder of this dev diary because it is just a patch dev diary talking about the changes that I'm sure you've all seen by now, but it really has to be noted that, for example, when it comes to things like planes, it's now down to 82 standard combat width, down from 90, I believe. So -8, which is nothing to be disregarded, because that does change quite a considerable amount of your composition. In addition, mountaineers are gone down from 75 to 65. So that's kind of making you into what? I guess I'm looking at like 22 widths, I guess is a good place to find yourself, but with special divisions, it's always difficult to determine how much you want to actually commit to making a solid mountaineer, or maybe you want to spam out some small paratroopers. My advice will always remain that whenever you're building a unit, just try and keep in mind what is the type of terrain you're predominantly going to be fighting on. A lot of the times if you're in Europe, you're going to be looking at things like plains, hills, and forests. So trying to find something that fits nicely into all 3 of those is probably going to work to your benefit. For example, the lowest common denominator from all of these is going to be hills at 72 from the forests and the plains, and 72 has quite a nice divisible of 3, so let's say 3 units per tile on a hill, meaning the average width there would be 24, I believe, and 24 is a pretty reasonable number to have as your average troop count. Okay, without dawdling any longer, let's go see the next dev diary, talking about art. From summer patches to tank pattern patch art, we find ourselves with Developer Diary 3D art. This is less so a technical dev diary talking about the nature of future updates, and more so giving an insight into the manner in which they design some of the 3D models we see in the game, beginning with things like art requests, and moving on to finding references for how they want things to appear in the game. There's not too much for me to comment on here personally, because the nature of the game doesn't change from this. However, I will mention I hadn't noticed the level of detail being so close that you can note things like the pickaxe attached on the side of like a tank, for example, or the individual nozzles. I really didn't know it was that detailed. I guess I just never zoom in enough to really appreciate the art in game. Of course, not everything is going to be just discussions of previous stuff. We do get to see some Arms Against Tyranny unit models, including this lovely looking truck with all the gear stored in the back. And this thing, my goodness, this thing. This is a snowmobile, right? With the skis or sleigh things on the bottom. But I didn't know there was this huge propeller on the back. I have never seen this thing before in my life, and it looks fantastic. The dev diary continues by talking about how they paint on the models, and also how some of the models are animated with their individual tracking systems. It's interesting to see how it's predominantly just like a few lines and then the turret shifting and moving around. Oh, and we even get to see the snowmobile looking thing. My goodness, no way was it that big. Was it actually that big? With the propeller that huge on the back? That is incredible. Look at that thing. Okay, well now that we've seen the majesty of what that snowmobile looks like, we can head on to the actual dev diary that we're supposed to be talking about today. So, moving straight on to that one. Boop, 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 boop. And hello everyone, and welcome back to an actual dev diary, talking today about small features, #1. So, presumably this is going to be the first of multiple. I don't know why you'd use #1 and then not make #2 and 3. So, yeah. This dev diary is going to be talking about 3 core things. All of them are pretty interesting and very relevant to the future of the game. Those are going to be division structure, the economy, and presets, as in designer presets. Beginning with division structure, we immediately see quite a dramatic change, and that comes in the form that while previously artillery, anti-air and anti-tank were in the same category as things like infantry, so when you built an infantry unit in your division designer, you could also stick artillery and anti-air in the same column. That is no longer going to be the case. Support battalions are going to be their own category, meaning that if you want to have a line of infantry, you're also going to have a separate line of support battalions. So your artillery is in a separate category altogether. The consequence of this, of course, is there's going to be finite more options of division variation that you're allowed to build. I mean, you're no longer able to build, let's say, 24 battalions of infantry with a single artillery on the end. I'm not sure why you would build that, but if you wanted to, that is no longer the case. Note that it has also made the split between mobile combat support battalions and combat support battalions. So, to that mind, I'm thinking, if you're really going to be building a tank division, you cannot spread out too far into the infantry division, as perhaps people have done previously, especially if you want to have mobility. That being said, I'm sure that there's still going to be the meta of having like heavy tank units backed up by infantry and just using them as like a defensive line. I don't think that's going away as a result of this. The next significant change that we see is the fact that that 5x5 grid of battalions that you can build is now a 5x4, and the 5th slot found at the very bottom is now going to be locked behind a research. Some things are better explained when you see them in a picture form, so let's have a look here. So as we can see here, the 5 across and 4 down are still accessible, but the bottom 5th slot is no longer accessible. So in this case, you can only get 4 battalions down before you have to move right. And this is important because, as we just said, things like artillery and anti-air are in a separate category. So if you want, let's say, this is going to be 8, this is going to be 16, and then you want your 20 width, well then you're going to have to go 2 more here, and so that's going to be your 20 width. But you also want artillery, well the artillery can't go here anymore, it's in the 4th column, and you realise you're actually quite quickly running out of room building your division. If you do want that 5th final slot, you're going to have to research one of the texts you find in the doctrines. My initial reaction is I don't think this is changing too much of the early game, because if you still have the left to right width, then I think you'll be able to fit everything you need in for your smaller division templates. But for your really late game, very well made templates, this could be a thing where you'll very quickly want to get the amount of XP necessary for you to be able to get the slots to actually be able to build the giant combat width units that you're wanting to build. As a side note, I will say this, don't be too surprised if you see more things like this happening as the game gets more updated. I feel that there is a general shift in Paradox and generally among the community to make this game more competitive and more tactical in the things that you're doing, as opposed to being like the player can do whatever they want. It's going to be more so about trying to find the optimal best builds in everything that you can possibly do. And we get to see a picture inside the doctrine of you getting the brigade size +1 at the very bottom. Next up, we're talking about economy, and this could be just as big or maybe bigger than the previous change we just saw to how Division Designer is going to work, and that is Consumer Goods Factories Factor. So previously, as I'm sure many of you know, the way your consumer goods were calculated is you would have the baseline justified by your law, so that would be civilian economy, war economy, total mobilization, and that would set the base, and then you would get modifiers from things like advisors or national spirits that would lower it. The problem is they didn't like the fact that you could get to 0% consumer goods, which I guess is ridiculous because your country is effectively providing no food or resources or anything for the civilian population. To change this, they've made a shift towards things being a percentage multiplicative factor on top of the economy law. So your economy law is going to be the same as it was. Partial mob is 25%, war economy is lower, civilian economy is like 35%, that's going to be the base, but the buffs and things you get from it are no longer going to be like minus 5%, they're going to be much bigger, but multiplied together to give you a reduction that can never get you to 0, in theory. So in this example, we see that the consumer goods are, kind of working the same way as you would expect. But down here, we see the way it's added is the baseline of partial mobilization is at 25%, but then the factors with your MIFO bills as Germany and your general stability are multiplied together to give you a 50% off that. So 50% of 25% is our 14%, that is our consumer goods total that we're using. From there, of course, 14% of 62 gives us the 8 consumer goods factories. So this is just something to bear in mind, that the buffs you get are multiplicative, so you're really going to struggle ever getting to 0, but on the flip side, countries that have lots of buffs towards consumer goods reduction are, I guess, getting buffed comparatively to countries that don't have as many consumer goods reduction buffs. TLDR, everyone has been nerfed. Basically everyone. And shortly at the end here, we see how war economy now states the expected number of factories put on consumer goods is 20%. That is before the multiplicative factor has been added on. And the final thing we're going to be talking about in this short dev diary, comprised of 3 dev diaries I suppose, is presets. So presets are going to be things that you can look at inside of your designers, such as tank designers, plane designers, and I presume ship designers, although to a degree a lot of them already had it, in which you're going to be able to create historical templates pre-made for you to just build. The reasoning for this is, a lot of players perhaps didn't know, myself included to be honest, the exact modules you would need to build for you to be able to create the historical representation of tanks that country would have had during World War II. As a result, you'll now be able to go into the preset menu and you'll have a list of historical presets already made for you to be able to use. So if you're looking for a decent heavy tank, then there will be one available to you. If you're looking hopefully for like a flamethrower tank, then you have one that's already made for you. This is also useful because if you're looking at how to build these things, you can look at the presets and it will tell you what modules and technologies you're going to need to research to be able to build that type of module. So it's also like a beginner friendly kind of feature, because now if you didn't know how to make flamethrower tanks, you can just go look at the preset for flamethrower tank. Oh look, I'm missing the like engineer thing, so that's going to be really useful. And to wrap this up, once you have been able to build the preset, you can of course edit the preset and change the preset to whatever you want, so you can keep expanding upon, let's say, the elephant tank and make it something that you truly want it to be. They end this dev diary by talking about how, as it stands, there's not going to be an ability for you to save presets, so unfortunately you can't design a tank in one playthrough and then pick it up in the next playthrough as something you've already designed, but they're not ruling it out as something they might do in the future. But as it stands right now, there's only going to be historical templates that are saved in the game, and that's it. So, to wrap up this dev diary, we've seen changes to combat width, making divisions smaller. We've seen that the division designer itself is making divisions smaller. We see that the economy is getting nerfed. And we're seeing tanks being brought up in line so that everybody has a chance at making the best tanks they can try to with no knowledge at all. If this isn't the game becoming more competitive and aiming at trying to allow every player to play at a higher skill level, I'm not sure what is. but maybe we'll find out more stuff in the small changes #2 that's coming later. So, what did you think? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next week. Why yes, I did enjoy TwitchCon Paris, thank you for asking. I met a Ginger HOI4 player there. He shook my hand. Very strange. Bye.